right, thanks everyone for coming. I'm from the business school, which I recognize is going to be a little bit different from our last presenter. I hope that there are plenty of tie-ins between these sorts of topics. We were talking just about transfer learning, and if I was really clever, I could make a link between transferring the knowledge from the computer science world to business, because there are difficulties there, and that's what I want to talk about today. What I want to do is I want to start with an example of the use of artificial intelligence in business right now, and then I'll explain where the research was behind that. So let's start off with something we're familiar with, and actually ties well to the last speaker. So think about customer service. When you call in for customer service, you often face a gauntlet. So let's think about financial services. You call in, first they want to know your name, they want to know your social security number, they want to know your date of birth, they want to know your high school girlfriend, they want to know your pet's name, they want to know all this information. Basically, it's all the information that social media has on us, but they want to know that to verify who we are. And we like that. We like that because if you're trying to get into my financial information, I want there to be this gauntlet. But the difficulty is for organizations in customer service is that they don't want to start off with that sort of adversarial gatekeeper sort of mentality. Can artificial intelligence help here? So if you think about it, one approach that many companies are taking is to try to automate that gauntlet. If you think about it, you've endured this probably. You've gone through the phone tree, you put in your account number, you put in your account number again, you've told the next person in the list what your account number was, you've gone through this gauntlet and it's automated. And so there's an approach of artificial intelligence to try to use things like chatbots to help with this process. Companies are attracted to this because of cost reduction, frankly. They want to do chatbot approaches because they want to pay for electricity, they don't want to pay for health insurance. But can artificial intelligence help a different way? And so, wouldn't it be nice if instead of running a gauntlet when you face an organization, for them to start off with, how can I help you? Not who are you, do you belong here, but how can I help you? And this is my sort of like coffee shop, hey, let's all be friends and help type of mentality. But I think there are some organizations that are working well with this. And how are they doing that? When you call in some organizations, they're voice printing you. And if you think about how different that is than what's your social security number, what's your date of birth, what's interesting about this is they can start off with the question, how can I help? What can I do for you? What's your problem today? And using about 10 seconds worth of you telling about your problem, they can figure out your identity. That's actually kind of a good thing. I mean, it feels a little bit invasive and there's some opt-in issues here. But what's nice about that is that it starts off that relationship on a helping basis versus a gauntlet basis. And that's a fundamentally different approach to artificial intelligence. You can think about artificial intelligence applies in both cases. Automating a chatbot, but also trying to help. And what's fun about this is I like what artificial intelligence can do here that humans maybe can't. So some of the systems here, they work on figuring out the voice latency. Like how long you're claiming to call from Boston, but your telephone voice latency shows that you're really calling from California or calling from somewhere else. That's suspicious. That's a warning flag. Or one of the things they're really getting good about is figuring out that you are you, but you're under duress. Perhaps you're not acting in your own best interest. Perhaps you're being coerced into making this phone call. Perhaps you're not in your right state of mind. So they have a fiduciary responsibility to try to help in these ways. And what's nice about artificial intelligence is it offers hope for doing both. I think this is a great example of companies who have two choices about how they apply these artificial intelligence tools and what different choices they can make. Some of this study comes off of a long and I guess 7 year or so research program that we've been involved with at MIT Sloan Management Review. And what we're doing is we're doing a yearly survey of business managers about how they're doing analytics and artificial intelligence. And we combine those yearly surveys with thousands of responses with interviews with companies to figure out what kinds of things that they're doing in practice. And we combine those and come up with a yearly research report. The most recent report that we've come out with is one called Reshaping Business with Artificial Intelligence. And so most of the results that I'll mention today come from this study. I don't know what the story is for distributing these slides, but there are URLs at the bottom of these, and I'm happy to make all these things available at any point. Just contact me. So what I'm going to pull from this report and some of the discussions is kind of one overall summary, and I think there are a couple of different causes behind that summary, and then four observations and four challenges. I wanted that to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but it just didn't work out right. And then I tried to make it a Fibonacci sequence, and it didn't work out right. So we're just going to have to go 1, 2, 4, 4. All right. So what's my number one summary? There's a lot of excitement about artificial intelligence. We've seen that at this conference. We've seen it in the newspapers. If you ask people what their kind of expectations are and what kind of effect artificial intelligence is having today, we get these red dots here. So we're looking, most industries overall came up and said, artificial intelligence is affecting us to a certain degree at 15 to 20%. And that's right now. You can almost tell from how much space I have to the right there that when we ask them what happens in 5 years, they think things are going to be quite different. And sure enough, they do. Actually, I worked a long time to make that appear. It looks kind of fun, doesn't it? Basically, right now, people aren't doing much, but they think in 5 years that they really will be. And so those numbers get huge. Those are all in the 60 and 70% ranges that they think will have a large effect on their business. All right, so expectations are very high. We've seen that in the media. We've seen that through all the hype. But one thing we ask people is, how much are you actually doing? And so if you look at it, we got about 54% of our organizations that we talk to have not started any sort of project at all. And then even another 23% only have pilots. So we're looking at about 77% of the organizations out there who are not actually doing much with artificial intelligence. That's a very sharp contrast to some of the media that you see about how much is going on here. And so what they say, we've asked them about, have they adopted, or they're planning to, their pilots, and how extensively they've incorporated. So expectations are high, but action is a little behind. Why are people adopting? And this is where I get to play my Richard Dawson Family Feud approach here. Lots of people feel like that suppliers and customers will influence them to do this. They're going to be driving a need for artificial intelligence-driven offerings. And so customers or suppliers will promote that. But you can tell, because it's at the bottom, that there's going to be some things that are on top of that. Cost reduction is huge. I gave that initial example about customer service. Well, reducing cost is important for people as well. They think AI is going to help them do that. There's also a fear thinking that people, if they don't do it, other people in their organization, in their industry will. So they're worried about competitors. 69% of the people are worried that their competitors are going to start using AI and push them out. And it doesn't have to be just existing competitors. They're also worried that new organizations are going to enter their market. Even more of those. That's this sort of fluid boundaries of industry that I think are developing from some approaches from technology. Not surprisingly, people also think that they can be the ones to go into new businesses. So I thought that was kind of fun that the 75% played out both ways. That both 75% of the people thought that they were going to be affected by new entrants and that they themselves might be a new entrant. And finally, and this is the fun one, and the biggest above all, is competitive advantage. Organizations feel that if they adopt artificial intelligence, they're going to get competitive advantage. So 84% of the people believe that to be true. Now, we can talk about that later, and that might be a good question for you to think about, is how much of that is real, and do people really know what advantage means in this context? I'm happy to talk about that. But clearly, that's what's driving this interest in artificial intelligence. One thing we did was we categorized groups. I mean, one of the things, as a business school professor, you have to either have a 2x2 matrices or a maturity category. That's kind of a requirement. I get in trouble if I don't. And what we do is we classify those by how much their understanding of artificial intelligence is and how much they're doing with artificial intelligence. And so we group them into people who are passive all the way through people who we call pioneers. And so I've got some information here about what's holding people back. And I've got it broken out by these different groups. So first, talent. Talent is big. And that's interesting because we hear a lot about AI technology. And just yet again, technology ends up being only a small part of the story. It's the people to do that end up being the barrier. And it's interesting to me that the people who are leading, this is this dark blue, people who are leading with artificial intelligence are actually feeling that constraint more so than people who are behind. Everybody has to worry about budget across the board. Whether you're leading or lagging, there are other things competing for those artificial intelligence dollars. Security, my background is security research. People, I think, are not quite worried enough about security, but it's interesting, the more further along they get with artificial intelligence, the more they start worrying about security and privacy issues. Culture is always huge. Across the board, it's huge. People are worried about how they will react in their organization. Technology tends to limit some of the laggers more than it does the more advanced organizations, and there's probably a little bit of a reverse causality there. Leadership support, as always, is a problem with any sort of technology venture. And finally, and fundamentally, people struggle to find a business case for artificial intelligence. We have cool technologies, we have fun, gee whiz, hey, we can recognize bagels versus beagles, but how do I actually use that to create business value? We had a great example in this study about Airbus and how they were using artificial intelligence. And one of the quotes that I like from Matt there was, hey, we don't invest in artificial intelligence. We're solving a problem. If it happens that artificial intelligence helps us solve it better, that's great, but we don't have any dollars set aside for artificial intelligence specifically. All right, so here are my fun sort of differences that I think that we've found. One is that leaders tend to approach things differently. And so I gave you that example of a different approach versus a chat bot versus a helping the customer service representative. If you think about an airline, who's more valuable, the pilot or flight attendant? And your gut reaction may be pilot. And I think that's true, especially early on. You know, you just can't get the thing off the ground unless you've got a pilot. But after a while, and as the airline grows and meets some sort of minimum expectation, what you end up with is the value to the organization crosses over. That the pilot kind of becomes less important. They're hidden in the cockpit. They're behind locked doors these days. But what becomes important is the flight attendant. And I think we can learn from this because what have airlines automated? I've not yet seen a robotic flight attendant, but we have a lot of autopilots going on in airlines. So people who are leading with artificial intelligence are thinking about clever ways of applying the algorithms they use. What else? This is good news for you. You're here at ODSC. There's a lot of talk about the democratization of data and how these things are going to be, tools are widely available. You can download the tools. Actually, Catherine just had a big list of tools you can download. You can have tools available all day long, but unless people invest in learning about them, they won't do any good. And so it's more of a meritocracy than it is an actual democracy. Turns out no one's born with AI skills. How do they get them? So a lot of people are doing training programs, either on-the-job training programs or formal training programs. We got some good examples of that coming up in our next report. There's also hiring. So they hire people from organizations, and good news for me as a university professor, people are hiring from universities, particularly these leading people. There's also outsourcing, but it's interesting that people who are further behind in AI are people who tend to go out for outsourced to either contractors or to other organizations. And so the key takeaway there is that people are not going to get this sort of benefit without some effort and without some investment. And that's particularly true as these data and tools become more widely available and become more commoditized. What's going to differentiate is the people who are using them. What else? A good example, too, is, and this ties really well with the natural language processing talk we just had, about the use of data. So this is data from NVIDIA about their accuracy in a particular ImageNet classification problem. And then so in 2010, this was actually a pretty wide range of accuracy rates, and it kind of peaked out in the low 70s in terms of accuracy. Things got better. The spread got less in 2011, and the peak went up a little bit. But in 2012, something fun happened. You see that those blue dots kind of plateaued here at about the mid-70s. But then this fun green dot appeared. What's the blue dot? The blue dot is rules-based artificial intelligence. If 3 legs, if fuzzy, then cat, if, or 4 legs, sorry, whoops, 4 legs, cat. I think I would fail that approach. But the green dot is about data and just training with massive amounts of data. And when that started to happen, you see the rule-based approach get eclipsed, and you see the green dots go upwards up into the 90s in terms of accuracy. So these deep learning approaches are more effective and have really supplanted these rule-based approaches. What's unfortunate for organizations is that means that all the data that the organization has is really important. There needs to be governance, which is not fun to talk about. There needs to be good infrastructure to have that data, because without that, then none of these things happen. This happens great in a lab because there's lots of images of cats and bagels and beagles, but in an organization, unless that data is being cleaned and governed well, then it's problematic. So it builds off that analytics infrastructure. A common problem of thought is about the future of work. So we ask people, what's this going to do to the people in the organization? So existing people are going to have to change what they're doing. 84% of the people think that's true. What I thought was fun here, and we go down through other numbers here, but down at the bottom here, less than half the people think that the workforce will be reduced. And I think that's at least encouraging in the short term for the humans, that these things are going to change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will disappear. We had the forethought to ask individuals what they thought about their own personal job, and this was only an accident, but it turned out beautifully. We asked people individually that I hope AI will do some of my job versus I fear. And it turns out the weird phase of this where hope is dominating. 70% of the people hope that AI will do their job. And if you think about that in your job, there's probably a lot that you wish AI would do. I'm a university professor. Answering questions that are literally written on the syllabus is something that I'm not adding any value to. My sarcasm does not help. And so I actually had worked with a student to try to build a little mini Alexa, Cortana, Siri to take and ingest my syllabus and be able to answer those questions. And I can't get students to use it. 31% fear. So if you think about it, we have a lot of things that we're doing that are not probably adding value to our lives or to our organizations. And there's hope that AI can hit those first. I have an example of that, and this comes from Bridgestone. And so I plan to talk about tires for a while. I got kind of fascinated by tires here. There's lots of different kinds of tires. I don't know if you can tell from my voice. I'm from the South. It's a monster truck. So there's monster truck tires. You got desert tires, snow tires. I hate snow. Tires to decorate boats, tires to do physical training with. In the South, we decorate with tires. So lots of different types of tires. This is related to artificial intelligence. Lots of different types of tires. What happened was Bridgestone had a ton of data about how people used tires and wanted tires. And that led to, with a combination of analytics, a great deal of personalization. They have lots and lots of different types of tires now. The problem is that tires are not a digital good. You can't just have tons of different products like Amazon has, and maybe off in some warehouse that you don't even actually see. Someone needs a tire and they need it locally. We don't have forethought when it comes to tires. We need a tire when we need it and it's an emergency. We can't drive a long way. And so what happened was the increased personalization that they had led to an inventory nightmare. Because they're trying to figure out what tires go at what location. And they have tens of thousands of locations where they're storing tires. So what do? Well, if analytics solve the problem, then analytics and machine learning have helped solve that secondary problem too. And so what they're doing is they're having tires allocated by machines. And so what that does, it's freed up a ton of people who used to come in every morning and allocate tires for location by location by location. The quote is, I was talking to Keith Moody, who's the director of analytics, and what he said was, I asked people, are you worried about people's jobs disappearing because their tire allocation job has gone away? No, they're thrilled. They're not excited about allocating tires. They think that they could do a lot more stuff. So one of the things I was talking with Eric Brynjolfsson about was, what's this going to mean for people? And his take wasn't that, well, it's going to eliminate people. AI is going to eliminate people. What he sees being eliminated are people who use AI will replace people who don't use AI. That's our short-term or medium-term sort of philosophy here. Okay. I promised you 4 challenges. I've got some challenges here, of course. One, I think the pace of AI is going to be a mess. What if you could walk into a house and get your loan approved immediately? Right now, mortgage approval takes 30 to 60 days. What if we put some AI on it and you could walk out of the door of the house with the keys? I don't think we're ready for that as a society. We just don't have processes built around that. We don't have checks and balances built in around that. It's difficult to know what AI is going to do with the pace of society. I'm really worried about myopia. You give someone a metric, you give them a measure, improve our hit rate, improve our page hits, improve our clicks, people go nuts. And they get very focused on that metric. And AI really is about getting a metric and improving the gradient until that metric gets better and better and better. And there's problems here that there may be a local optimal for that AI gradient, or we may just not even be on the right metric. And so these things become very important. AI is super immature. I mean, we talk about the fun examples, and we'll see examples here, and they're fun to look at, but most of them are not production ready. We've seen lots of fun examples of chatbots. I think Microsoft was mentioned in the last one. Well, Microsoft also had the Taybot, which became a nightmare of everything that's wrong with the internet very quickly. And I think that's a great example. I think they learned from that. But AI is very immature. It's not really ready necessarily for production and scale across organizations. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't pursue it, but it has to be cautious. And finally, and this again ties with the last speaker as well, is that it's hard to put AI into an executive role. One of our results that's going to come out in our next study is that people's level in the organization, their fear of AI depends greatly on where they are in the organization. Turns out you don't have a dozen companies that you can run an A/B test on and see which one works out. There's a ton of variables that you don't know about. One of the examples that I was talking with people about CVS, and so CVS does an extensive amount of analysis to figure out where to place their new stores. They look at foot traffic, they look at prescriptions, they know a lot about the demographics of an area before they open the store. This is their joke, not mine. They don't just put them next to Walgreens. There's actually an algorithm that goes deeper than that. That's not my joke, that's theirs. What happened was they made a fundamental change in their business model a few years ago. They removed tobacco products. And the difficulty was that every bit of data that they had about predicting store performance was from a world full of tobacco products. So that's a great place where humans knew something about what was going to change in the world that the algorithms did not know. And so we still have some sort of role in this process, at least for now. There's just not there's the curse of dimensionality when it comes to organizations and executive roles. All right, if I can leave you some thoughts to think about, some of your job is boring. What can you automate? I've tried with my syllabus answering. There are other examples of emails that I get, like, hey, I missed class today. Did you do anything? What did I miss? And I said, oh no, did I miss anything? No, you didn't miss anything. When I look up and you're not there in class, we just shut down for the day. There are parts of your job that are not interesting as well. What can the machine help with? Most of these algorithms are going to be limited by our data. The data we have, the data we wish we had. I think we're really getting good at analyzing the data we have. We've got a decade's worth of good experience here, but we don't quite have, there's a lot of missing data. We don't know a lot about people who don't buy. We know a lot about people who do buy, and that's much harder. I think there's a lot of artificial intelligence approaches that are solving a wrong problem. And a good example I was writing something about last month was about fax machines. The medical industry works off of fax machines. They fax data back and forth happily. Fax was invented in 1860. I think it's time for us to think about a transition here. And so what people are doing is they're using artificial intelligence to do image recognition to understand what's on the fax machine and get it into a system. That may be wonderful, and I'm sure it's useful, but I think we can do better. So you're telling me you have a system that prints out data that someone takes an image of, that you transfer across a telephone line, that you then print out and take an image of and do image scanning to get it back into another system. I mean, I think we could do some really amazing AI there, but I think there's a simpler solution, and we shouldn't ignore that simpler solution. There's a lot of hype and a lot of things that are underhyped, perhaps, and I'm curious about what your ideas, thoughts, complaints, and comments are. And I'm particularly interested if you have a good example. I think that there's a dearth of examples of organizations using artificial intelligence well. And if you'd like to share one, I would love to hear it. And I think I'm right on the money. Thank you for your time. I hope it's interesting. Actually, what's our story? I can't remember what our...
We have a minute remaining, so we can probably take one question.
Across the board. So actually, one of the things we ask them is how big is your organization, and then we look at interesting differences across organizational size, and we ask them both in terms of revenue, but also in terms of number of employees, because there's a fair number of size metrics. And you're asking about adoption, where the adoption was across that. I don't remember a distinction though, but if you give me 10 minutes afterwards with my computer, I can check out and see if there was. I don't remember there being an interesting distinction between size for that metric. Thank y'all. Love to talk to you more.